We're back, baby. Sorry about that, folks. My internet just completely cut out for about 3 minutes, and now it's back. Sorry about that, guys. Sorry. But now it's a new stream, so y'all have to dono. I don't make the rules. You guys, there's a white name in chat. Look, it's very troubling. On-screen chat not working. We'll refresh that. Okay. Yeah, had a little on-screen chat had a little hiccup. Okay, but I paused it immediately. It's okay. We're all reunited, friends. We're reunited. Hey, spooky ass Bone Man, how you doing? 2 white names. One is like spitting in the eye of God, and 2 is like spitting in both eyes of God.
And I don't have a great way of drawing the line that's not kind of arbitrary, but you do have to draw it somewhere.
Oh, Paladin, thank you for the $10 dono. I've got a tenor and a love of following the rules. Hell yeah. Maybe someone can poach these white names. I hear they make excellent rugs.
I will allow Mr. Knowles the obvious.
I really do love that this libertarian still fell for the Achilles heel of libertarianism, which is just the inability to just say that, like, you know, being an adult should be like at 18 or 20, you know, like at least pick a fucking age. Come on.
Yeah, well, I don't think that one's view has to be arbitrary on this matter. I don't think my view is arbitrary. I just don't think transgenderism is true.
Well, we're talking about age. We're talking about
age.
Well,
but this gets to age because for all of human history, pretty much no one has thought that the transgender idea really is true. And you don't seem to think that it really is true. It's interesting
well,
that
I think I view it differently.
Thoysome, thank you for gifting Spooky S. Boyne.
But here's the inconsistency that I find.
I just said Spooky S. Boyne Man. My goodness, I've been streaming too long today. Spooky S. Bone Man, a tier 1 sub. Thank you so goddamn much.
Find in your point. You say that when you turn
Tag
18,
and tag
you
'em,
want
boys.
to be able to chop yourself
Thoysome,
up
thank you for
and put on a
gifting
dress
Skype for
and
his
go to a
Hana
women's
sub.
bathroom and putting
Hell
aside
yeah.
the public issues that come from that. I just wonder
Thank
how it is
you.
the case that transgenderism is false for the first 18 years and then suddenly becomes true when one turns 18. And
White
if that is
names
not what's
out.
really happening, if it is false and your trepidation in exposing children to this is because it obviously is false, if it's false and harmful for children, why is it beneficial and true for adults? Shouldn't we apply an even standard across the board and come to a conclusion?
So you often set this up as a dichotomy, but I think that it either has to be true for all or false for all. I think it's a false dichotomy. I think the issue is children cannot fully consent to the full consequences of a life-altering medical procedure. We're not even talking about social transition.
Only I get to
think
spit
if
in
you
the
have a
eyes of God?
persistent
Hell yeah.
Gender dysphoric 13-year-old.
That's a kink that I will
and you want
support.
to have them socially transition. I think that's up to parents. Conservatives were just screaming yesterday about parental rights. I'm fine with that.
But not parental wrongs.
You should have the right, with only very, very high exceptions in extreme cases, to parent your kids rightly or wrongly. And it's not badly or well, except for extreme cases of abuse.
So I'd actually like you to draw that out for a second here, because I think the thing that we can all agree on in this room is that parents make life-altering decisions for and with their kids outside the question of gender. Mr. Knowles' choice to raise his children Catholic sets a mark on them that, you know, they may diverge, but they'll still have been raised Catholic in their beginnings.
But you can convert, you can't undo a lot of the medical transition things. It can permanently sterilize you for life.
So that's what I'm asking about a little. How are you thinking about what a parent can and cannot consent to on behalf of their child?
I think the same way a parent cannot consent to sex on behalf of their child. There's obviously a level of physical maturity you have to reach before you can make potentially life-altering decisions about your body. And so something like raising your kids Catholic, well, if your kid grows up and wants to become Jewish or an atheist, they can. They can't undo a bottom surgery, right? Not really. So that's why I draw that distinction. And I would just say, to Michael's point that it either has to be true for everyone or false for everyone, first off, we're talking about the government as an arbiter of truth or not, but also we can have different standards for kids and adults. You can't get a tattoo as a child. You can't drink. You can't buy a gun. You can't go into our movie. You can have different. It's a false dichotomy.
You can't take hormones if your parents were you're too short as a child, and I'm curious whether you think that's something parents should consent to. Doctors will give you growth hormones if you're projected to be short enough that they worry it will impact your quality of life.
Yeah, I think there's a very different between.
And it's permanent. It's not undoable.
Between that
the child
and, for
can
example,
kind of only
like
guess so much what it's like to be an
precocious
adult.
puberty, right? When sometimes you'll have a rare case where a 7-year-old will start going through
So
puberty.
I want to unpack the difference between these two. Precocious puberty is slowing down something that will happen.
Right.
Choosing to give your child growth hormones is triggering a permanent change that cannot be undone. Do you think parents should be able to consult to growth hormones on behalf of their child when they're told their child will be very short? It's a choice parents make across the country.
I would say if there's not going to be like life-altering harm and consequences for it, yes. But I mean, the difference is like if you go through gender
How? There aren't going to be that. Human beings are not genetically or biologically different if they are trans or cis. For fuck's sake. Yeah, we back Just Chicken Wing. Like imagine making this argument and just being like, well, yeah, it's okay for cis people, but not for trans people. Why?
transition as a minor and never go through your natal sex as puberty, you often lose fertility for life. That's not quite the same thing as being a few inches.
Yeah, if you medically transition, you lose fertility. Generally speaking. There are other ways to have children. What? Like, yeah, and? There are plenty of cis people who have fertility issues. What? So?
Taller or not.
Then just like my response is then fucking adopt. Fucking adopt. You're gay, my dude. You are gay. You're a gay man. You're gonna have some fertility issues in your future marriage, okay? I can tell you that. I thought fertility does return after stopping HRT in most cases. Well, it depends, right? If you have bottom surgery, and you're trans, no, obviously. If you are, and also, if you are on HRT, it really does depend. Like, your fertility is absolutely going to be impacted if you are, like, a trans woman who's been on HRT for, like, 10 years, you know? I thought fertility does return after stopping HRT in most cases. Well, it can. Like, technically, I've been on hormones for, like, 5 years now. Like, if I could technically get my partner, our sex having could result in a baby, or pregnancy, but the chances of that are remarkably low. And I don't think that they're going to be much higher if I stop. I mean, I could try, but I don't really want to, you know?
Interestingly, the pitch is often, in some sense, about preserving future fertility insofar as the doctor worries being too short will inhibit your ability to find a spouse.
Well, that's a whole other issue.
All right. Mr. Knowles, I want to ask you the question that you aren't going to get asked by Mr. Palumbo because you're debating him rather than Ms. Mitlowski. People report, and you disagree, that they have a different anthropology than you. They don't agree with your description of the soul. And what they say is, I see my child, I see them light up when they get to dress in the way.
Yeah, by the way, like I was saying, once you have them arguing on the basis of a soul, like you're essentially like, oh well, they're essentially arguing that they have like some kind of, oh god damn it, fucking hell. Sorry, 1 second, gotta do this. Once they're arguing on the basis of like a soul, you're in fantasy land, right? Like, okay, why you need to give me a reason to believe that souls exist.
Way they want. I see them.
And that is
know,
not an
feel more
argument they can win.
comfortable. Even aside from those longer term questions, how can I as a parent be so sure when you tell me that when I see my child feel more comfortable, they're wrong and I'm wrong, when in anything else, if they signed up for Little League and it really fit for them, I would go with it, I would explore it, and your answer here is not. So how do you answer that sense of a parent's sense of their own child and that particular child's response to a transgender, feeling?
I think this point by the phantom of Professor McCloskey is a very good one, because it would seem to me that what transgenderism is proposing is an anthropology. It's an idea about what human nature is. And so if it is true, then it is true for children, and I'm not using this to suggest we
It's
get rid
okay,
of
sentient
trans
waffle,
kids.
it happens.
Ultimately, I think that, of course. But if it's true, then it would seem to me very cruel to prevent a child from transitioning, especially before puberty, because if you can...
Yes, indeed. It would seem to be that, Michael. It would indeed seem to be quite cruel to force a trans child to go through cis puberty. Yes.
Suppress a child's puberty, and then you can put them on cross-sex hormones, and then you can have the little boy look more like a little girl. He is going to much more successfully pass as the opposite sex than if he were to be put on these kinds of hormones and have these procedures much later. It would be much more expensive, it would be much more painful. And so if transgenderism is true, then I think we have to trans the kids. Now, it so happens that transgenderism is not true, and there are people who are in all various states of anxiety and depression and suicidality even, who have fallen into this confusion of transgenderism.
That was not worth it.
And so just as I think it would be wrong to lead children who are behaving in an irrational way down this path, I think it would be quite wrong to do that to adults as well. Mr. Palumbo has conceded the point that at the extremes of anorexia, it would be fine to force feed and suppress a child's puberty, and then you can put them on cross-sex hormones, and then you can have the little boy look more like a little girl. He is going to much more successfully pass as the opposite sex than if he were to be put on these kinds of hormones and have these procedures much later. It would be much more expensive.
Yeah, this boss
is
is bullshit.
And so if transgenderism is true, then I think we have to trans the kids. Now, it so happens that transgenderism is not true, and there are people who are in all various states of anxiety and depression and suicidality even, who have fallen into this confusion of transgenderism later on. And so just as I think it would be wrong to lead children who are behaving in an irrational way down this path, I think it would be quite wrong to do that to adults as well. Mr. Palumbo has conceded the point that at the extremes of anorexia, it would be fine to force feed somebody or force somebody into hospitalization. Mr. Palumbo has made the point that someone suffering body identity disorder would not be able to get this sort of a surgery to remove a limb. What doctor in his right mind would do it? I will point out there are doctors today removing the healthy breasts of 14-year-old girls, so I think you can find a lot of quacks out there. In fact, there have been quacks who have performed this surgery, but none of us, I think, believes that we ought to chop off the healthy limbs of these very mentally ill.
Like, I love that his basic argument was just like, well, transgenderism is not true, therefore, the people who are transitioning are just all mentally ill from some kind of mental illness. They've been bamboozled by some kind of, I don't know, demon or devil into thinking that they need to transition. And like, yeah, that's. Oh yeah, irked. Transphobes really like to equate like transgender people with folks who have like a neurological compulsion to like remove like their arms or legs, It's very, very, very rare, but like it does happen. The difference is we have evidence that shows transgender, like treating transgender people with gender affirming care helps transgender people. There's no evidence to indicate that removing the limbs of people with those compulsions, A, removes the compulsion, or B, improves their quality of life, you know? So that's the difference.
Ill people. So I just don't see why we wouldn't apply that down the line. Professor McCloskey's position is a consistent position, and it's consistently wrong. And I think that if we're going to be right here, we have to be consistently right. To Brad's point that he keeps saying, why would you want the government to do this? Why would you trust the government? I've said it before, I suppose I'll say it again. In the United States, we are the government. Even with all the corruption, we are the government. And if we surrender our capacity for reason and moral conscience, if we really say that we can't know the difference between true and false and right and wrong, then we're surrendering self-government. This is what John Adams meant when he said the Constitution's built for a moral and religious people. That wasn't soft soap and a nice platitude. He's saying that's how self-government works. If we surrender that, we lose the American project.
Mr. Palumbo, I do want to ask you the same question. What would you say to a parent who says, I want to take care of my child, everything I see in my child's behavior, not just in what they tell me, but in the way they act when I address them in one way or the other, when I put them with one group of kids or the other, tells me they're happier this way and uncomfortable the other, but you say I can't do this till they're 18. Why?
Well, to clarify, I'm okay with them socially transitioning.
But I think you know that that's not always where people want to stop.
I agree.
Right? So,
in terms
so
of the
what would
medical
you say to
transition,
that parent?
The reason that that is not appropriate is that child is too young to really consent to the life-altering possibilities of that, but two, going through puberty of your natal sex. We okay?
Some people were transitioning to the front rows, and so I think the security got a little worried about that.
Okay. I'll just start over.
So again, I'd like to ask the question again, because I think the reason the noises are so loud out there and the reason everyone got quiet when we saw someone moving is that people think the stakes of this question are high.
They are.
And that parents worry if they listen to you, Mr. Palumbo, and wait and act later, they may not be taking care of their child or loving their child as they are.
So
and it sounds like you're all right with them doing that later, but not earlier. And I think that's a big burden of proof for that
So
question.
I understand completely, and that's why I think this is a really complicated issue. I don't envy a parent who has a child with severe gender dysphoria. I can see why they would be incredibly torn on what the right thing to do is. But what I will say is that it's actually the process of going through puberty as your natal sex that often causes gender incongruity to desist. So the problem is that now they go on puberty blockers, then they do cross-sex hormones. They never actually go
Wait, I know that my gender dysphoria has been cured by looking at and feeling up tits on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day, and yes, I had to grow them myself for it to work. True. This audio, like, again, this is why I say conservatives would be entertained. Like, conservative comedy is the ultimate grift, because you basically just go on stage and jangle keys for them. Okay, it's the ultimate grift. Is Knowles the dude to the right of the lady? No, this guy is Michael Plumbo, and the other guy is Michael Knowles. Or is his name Michael Plumbo? It doesn't matter. His name's Plumbo. And it's probably Palumbo, but I'm going to call him Plumbo.
That's why previously, decades ago, when you had gender incongruent youth, many of them grew up to be gay men or lesbian women. And that was...
No, that's because gender incongruency was defined much wider than gender dysphoria, that they're two different things. Gender incongruency in the 70s meant, like, anything from, like, you know, your 5-year-old boy talks about wanting to be a girl to and like cries if you don't call him a girl, to your 5-year-old boy likes to play with Barbie dolls sometimes, or like likes the color pink. You know, like that's gender incongruency. and that it encompasses such a wide group of children that it's practically worthless when you're trying to talk about trans kids.
Was because when they went through their puberty, they reconciled their gender. They realized the things they were feeling didn't mean they were actually
Is there a
trapped in the
point
wrong
after a
body.
certain trial of puberty? where
God,
you feel
he's even
comfortable
wrong
with
when
a
he tries
minor
to cite
transitioning, when they say, "I've given it a
facts."
good shot, Mr. Palumbo. Like, you said this works for some people. It doesn't work for me.
That's why it's so hard to have the government come in and set a one-size-fits-all rule. I have also said that, I think the age of consent should be 18, but in some states it's 16 or 17. It would make sense to me then that in those states you could also transition gender at 16 or 17. But I don't know exactly where to draw the line. And that's part of
Oh,
my
God
point
damn it.
here, is that Michael keeps saying transgenderism is false. And if it is false, it should be banned. I don't believe the government should be in the business of banning false ideas. Michael's also said that transgenderism is a false religion. So then we want to ban religions. I'm wondering what happened to freedom of religion? What happened to freedom of speech? And also, the average federal bureaucrat has the politics of Elizabeth Warren. And I know you can cite noble things about self-government, but the truth is we have a bloated bureaucracy that does not represent the American people. It is an entrenched political class with politics much different than yours. So the idea that we're going to make that government the arbiter of what ideas are true and false and ban or eradicate some ideas as a result of that seems to me not just a bad idea on principle, but incredibly
it.
short-sighted for people from your background and worldview and values.
Mr. Knowles, how do you think you would fare under a government that has the reach and, intimacy that you are advocating for?
I think I would fare fairly well because, while I agree with Brad's point that we have far too many bureaucrats on the
hell?
federal payroll, the recent upending of laws
damn it.
concerning sex and gender have come from elected and appointed officials. It's come from the Supreme Court, appointed by presidents. It's come from legislators in Charlotte, North Carolina, and all over the country. So it has been from representatives of the people and appointed officials who've been appointed by representatives of the people, and the people change their minds.
God.
That's one of the features of democracy. And so, unfortunately, the Supreme Court in 1973 decided that there were some imaginary right to abortion, and this error persisted for a long time. And then 49 years later, the court reversed that decision. In 2020, the Supreme Court made an error and decided to interpret civil rights law protections for sex as being protections for sexual orientation and gender identity, which ironically undermines civil rights protections for sex by allowing the men to play on those sports teams and go to the bathrooms. And so, in this case, I know, Brad, you keep suggesting that I want this very narrow, authoritarian, totalitarian view. I don't. There are all sorts of questions where I'm happy to leave things pretty open. But on certain issues where only one side can
There we
establish its
go.
principle in society,
Whew,
you have to come to
smelter
conclusions.
demon.
And I would come to the conclusion that has prevailed for all
babe.
through history, not the one that cropped up 5 seconds ago.
So I want to push a little on what pressing on these questions and
Bye,
this distinctions
Luca
means
Teal.
for kind of the stability of our democracy.
Yep.
Because it's one thing when losing power means, losing a little bit of
Thanks,
ground on some
Skyfer's
parts
hot.
of your agenda. The tax rates are set differently, more or fewer oil wells are drilled. And another thing when laws kind of seesaw wildly between administrations.
Yep.
We have the kind of the gag rule on abortion. It's one example of a law that just gets flipped on and off every time the administration changes, and it feels like more and more laws are in that all or nothing executive order thing. It seems to me that makes every election feel apocalyptic.
Yes.
We get more of the Flight 93 talk, right?
What?
How do you see a way out or through that, right? If people feel losing an election means losing ground possibly permanently, it doesn't seem we can live alongside each other at all. We've already lost faith in democracy, kind of regardless of where we draw the line when we're in power.
This is such an important point. And the reason that you've seen this kind of radical polarization where now we go topsy-turvy every election is every election that we're able to win, for that matter. Sometimes the Democrats rule for a long time. The reason for that is because we no longer have shared norms and standards. And so the very thing that I am arguing is a solution to this problem. The reason that our norms and standards have broken down is because half a century ago, leftist activists decided to upend our standards and norms in our culture, to say that having any standards or norms at all would be authoritarian and anti-American. And so what happened was the left pushed their radical new standards. In the 1950s, In the 1940s, you could read the Bible in schools, you could not read pornography in schools. Today, you cannot read the Bible in schools, you can, and in some cases are assigned to read pornography in schools. It's not a battle of more freedom or less freedom, it's a battle of what standards.
Michael, interesting. Where are schools assigning pornography for kids to read? Where is this happening? Oh, no, it's not. It's just not. Look, guys, here, Michael Knowles is employing a very advanced rhetorical technique called lying. He does it a lot, and it's frustrating. And yet, it seems to be rhetorically effective on his audience. So, you know, it is what it is.
Are we going to have? What taboos are we going to have? And so what happened, especially in the 60s, is the left knocked down all of the old standards. They insisted upon their standards in their place, and the conservatives lost the ability to even speak about standards, to even speak about the good, the true, and the beautiful, the common good, what's true and false. And as a result, the left has totally upended things. But I think if we can reassert a sensible vision, then things will go less topsy-turvy.
I'm going to indulge my nerdery for 1 second, then pose a last question to you two, then we'll take questions from the audience. Mr. Knowles, do you really think this is a question of the left pushing, or more of what Alistair McIntyre describes as just the losing, for many people, including conservatives, of a sense of where order comes from, till we don't have a language to speak
Yeah, it's
to,
not
and
even a straw man.
one
He's
side
just
putting forward
lying.
new norms, but all sides nearly losing touch with what...
Again, the straw man is saying that the left would oppose any kind of standards whatsoever, as opposed to, standards that you can make coherent and logical arguments for, right? So, for example, not a great idea to run around naked outside because, hey, a lot of bad things can happen when you run around naked. There are hygiene issues. There are societal issues to running around naked outside. There are increases to, harm done to the body by running around naked outside. You can make arguments for why, certain social norms or laws should be in place. But if we suddenly found out that, there was extreme harm being done to people by not being able to run around naked outside, that policy should change, right? If we found out that by I don't know, it cured cancer or prevented cancer entirely, or you lived 25 years longer if you ran around naked outside, right? Sure, that would be grounds to make the argument that, hey, we should change society somewhat and improve it by, living 25 years longer or some shit. It's a silly hypothetical, but that's, the argument is the same whether it's silly or actually, applicable to our current world, the good and more coherent example would be smoking, right? Everyone smoked everywhere all the time for a very, very long time. Basically all of human history from when we discovered how to smoke things until 30 years ago. And people stopped because we discovered that, hey, actually smoking gives both you and the people around you cancer if you do it. So, maybe don't, maybe stop, and we changed our societal laws, and hey, suddenly we've changed society for the better. Wow, crazy.
Gives rise to their norms that they learned kind of habitually from their community without learning them from the roots up.
Well, it's...
I think you're blaming just one side here, and I don't know that I believe you on that.
No, I blame both of those things, but I think one is a consequence of the other. If not entirely a consequence, largely a consequence. Why are people not in touch with the basis of order and truth? Might it have something to do with the fact that left-wing activists booted the Bible out of schools? Why is it that people don't have a solid formation about the grounding of our government and our public life? Might it have something to do with the fact that a judge decided that preachers can no longer speak about political things, that religion now has to be merely a private matter for the inner closet of your own consciousness rather than a matter of public life? To me, these are not separate questions, and I point to the left because they have been so conscious and intentional about this kind of a strategy, and because the feckless conservatives bought on with the logic. You know, there's a line from William F. Buckley Jr., who's very important to this organization, that I always come back to from God and Man at Yale.
Ah, yes, William F. Buckley Jr., the guy well known for debating against civil rights. Wonderful.
And he was quoting a liberal, actually, who said it. And he said, skepticism has utility only when it leads to conviction. It's nice to have a big open society, but sometimes people's minds are so open that their brains fall out. A poem is beautiful because of its limits and its constraints. We are limited beings, and so we can't be all things to all people, because then we're not anything to anyone.
Can I just hop
Yes,
in
you
and
may.
say
I gave
something?
him a bit of time there, yes.
Yeah. So you say that you want the truth, the freedom to speak the truth and the good and the beautiful and everything else. But at the same time, I mean, you'd toss up and rip up the First Amendment to stop drag queens from reading books to kids.
The First Amendment doesn't protect that.
It does.
It doesn't. The First Amendment, from the beginning of our country, has not protected whole scores of speech. Obscenity, notably, in
It
this
is
case.
not obscene if it's, so first of all, you could ban all sexual performances, drag or not, from having minors, and I would support that. But to have a fully clothed...
So you'll shred the First Amendment?
No, that is obscenity. There's a very
okay.
clear standard of
Great.
what obscenity
I'm glad
is.
we
And
agree.
a fully clothed person, who is simply dressed in the attire of the other gender and wearing makeup, reading books to children, is protected by the First Amendment.
Brad, for much of our country's history, cross-dressing was illegal throughout
We
the
had
country,
the
including
Alien
in San
Sedition
Francisco.
Acts. We
by the
had
way.
slavery just because we didn't always live up to
We
the
still
values.
are part of the Alien Sedition Acts. That's
But they're
a
not
matter for another
enforced.
time.
But so I'm saying just because we had things in the past doesn't mean they're actually consistent with our rights and values.
I suppose what you're saying, though, Brad, is, Michael, your view is anti-American, and it's not consistent with the First Amendment. And what I'm pointing to is the people who wrote the First Amendment, the people who ratified the First Amendment, the people who lived in a country under the First Amendment for the vast majority of our country's history, they all agreed with me. And people in very recent times have started to pervert the meaning of the First Amendment to kind of agree with your
The people who wrote the First Amendment also wrote the Alien and Seditions Act.
So now
clearly
you're saying
they
the
didn't
First
practice
Amendment's
what they
no good.
preached.
So I
Sure.
want
But
to
the
ask-
text of the
I'll take it for a
Constitution
second,
and the
Mr. Miller.
principles outlined are what's important, not the
This is
imperfections
what
of the
I want
people
to
that
ask you a little
drafted
bit
them.
about where you see those principles and what they lead to. Because I think there are two ways to interpret
Fight,
what
fight,
we want
fight.
out of free speech, and I know which side Mr. Miller stands on, so he's not getting the questions. One is that free speech, open discourse, is a good in and of itself, possibly to avoid coercion or too large a government that would be needed to suppress speech. But the other view, which is the view I know Mr. Knowles holds, so he's not going to need to respond to this one, is that the reason we want freedom of speech is to arrive at truth, in the same way that we want peer review in scientific journals, not so that there's ultimately a panoply of voices, but so that by hearing everyone out, we wind up with one voice speaking one thing that is true. And I'm curious, for you, Mr. Palumbo, do you see the point of free speech as an end in itself, a protection from coercion, or as a tool to slowly, gravitate towards one thing that is true, and free speech is a tool that gets us there, but not the good we are pursuing?
So I definitely reject the utilitarian view of free speech. Now, I think to some extent both can coexist, in that I think the best ideas do win out over time, and that sunlight can be a strong form of disinfectant. But there is utility in and of itself of letting man be free to say wrong and false things.
And
That
tell
is
me
the
about
kind of
tell me
society.
about what you like about that, because you've rejected one version of it. So what is the good you see in doing that?
That's the most fundamental aspect of what if you're not free to speak, you're not free to think, right? That is one of the most fundamental things about humanity is
And
being.
I'm going to press one more
Whoa.
time just because
What
for the
galaxy-brained
panelists,
arguments
I know
he's
Mr. Knowles
making.
would. What is the good of being free to think?
To explore and find the best ideas in part, but also to fulfill the human experience. That's what life is learning and making your way through the world and deciding what you believe. And if you're not free to think and you're not free to speak, you're not able to do that. So it's like the idea of, for example, coerced morality isn't really morality, right? Because if people are doing the right thing or believing that, for example, like everyone's very loyal to Kim Jong-un in North Korea. But there's not actually much value in that loyalty because it's done at the threat of death.
lot of value for Kim Jong-un.
All right, at this point,
Would you say?
And you would like to be Kim Jong-un.
Do you? I don't think I would.
On the narrow issue
I wouldn't
of-
look
of
as good in the
transgenderism.
suits. I don't think I would.
I have more questions, but since I am not Kim Jong-un, I will not be a tyrant and use the time for questions. I want to look a little at the ISI host. We have a mic over in the corner. Is the plan for Bill to approach the mic? Just to check, since it's tucked in the corner. corner. I want to remind people
Question
that the
time.
best way of asking your question is to have it formed very clearly in your mind before you step up to give other people the best chance of also asking theirs. Questions should be 3 to 5 sentences, brief to the point, because I want as many voices to be heard here as possible. So, questions from the body.
Hey, thanks for coming, guys. I've been a fan of both you for a long time, mostly Brad, though.
Hey, there's one. We got one.
The reason I'm a libertarian is because government is inherently a monopoly on violence that will always further accumulate more wealth and power no matter what you do. So having said that, my question is from...
Yeah. The market certainly doesn't do that. Nope. No, sir. The market certainly doesn't have mechanisms by which it consolidates wealth in the upper echelons of society over time, and by consolidating wealth, allow it to manipulate the market, and also manipulate the government to do what it wants. Nope, it's only the government. The government is bad. Yep, you nailed it, bud. Good job.
Michael. As the size of government has grown, so has the acceptance of alternative or degenerate lifestyles on a systemic scale. Culture and the legal system reflect this. How can you recognize this fact while believing that simply using the state to fight this behavior in the legal system will lead to the necessary cultural change to eradicate it from public life?
Well, the government hasn't just grown. I guess that's the misconception at the heart of this. Yes, obviously, we're a much bigger country now, 330 million people. The federal government is much more powerful than it was some 200 years ago. But in other ways, the government has weakened. In other ways, the ability of local governments to control their own communities and set standards, that's weakened considerably. The ability of school boards to set curricula now is quite controversial. The rights of states have completely gone away. The states essentially have no real power anymore if they ever disagree with the federal government. So once again, I don't think this is an issue just of government getting really big or government getting really small. Conservatives have never supported small government. It's not possible for a country of 330 million people with a global empire to have a small government. What we can have is a limited government. So we want government to be within its natural and proper limits. And so when we're talking about the limits of the government, especially in a self-government such as ours, we have this question: do we have the political right to set certain standards? Are our rights merely the individual licenses to pursue whatever delusional and depraved sexual identities that we want to pursue, or any other kind of fantastical ideas? Or do we have an exalted freedom that will suppress some of our lower appetites, but will give us a flourishing community? That latter idea was the idea that has animated our country, that made our country great, that made our whole civilization great. As we've lost that, the government's gotten all out of whack, as you described, and the country's gone to pot.
That was an admirably concise question. I'd ask you both to kind of imitate questioners in concise.
That was a less admirably concise answer.
Little
Yeah.
bit. Just to get as many as possible. We'll go to the next one. I'll throw a dichotomy as we go. America is too large to be justly governed, yes or no?
America is not too large to be justly governed. There have been plenty of empires that have been justly governed.
Dichotomy.
Well, I'd suggest we should maybe be doing a little bit less of the worldwide empire part.
Fair enough.
Sure.
But also, I would say it is too large to be governed by one large federal government, and that's why it should be decentralized as much as possible.
Next question from the students.
Thank you guys both for coming. As an aspiring journalist, political content creator, you guys have been keeping me busy over the last couple weeks. I appreciate that. I'm a senior at Point Park University. It's probably about 15 minutes from here. The school made headlines last year for their implemented pronoun mandate, saying that if students told you what their pronouns are and you didn't abide by that you can get in trouble through administration. It being a private university, how do you recommend not only fighting back against that rule, but having students who are mainly liberal on that campus kind of see your side of that argument?
The university is obviously very liberal, and so they probably buy into all sorts of student governance kind of silly policies. So you could try to get some power and wield it that way. But as you point out, it's a school. It has the right to set its own standards.
I love how he talks about how, like, no, empires aren't too big to be governed, you know, blah blah blah. But you know, if you disagree with that point, you know, just don't listen to the government. You know, it's fine, whatever. Whatever.
Especially as a private university, it can do that. And so ultimately, if you can't persuade the administration to do it, you might have to seek out a community that's more reasonable and that very likely will provide you with a better education if the school that you're attending doesn't know the difference between men and women.
Yeah, I think I agree with Michael. They're a private school. They can have stupid anti-free speech policies if they want, but I think you should transfer.
We all want to.
Oh yeah, for sure. My bad. Mr. Palumbo, it's awesome that you could come here on such short notice. How much did they pay you to do it?
A lot.
You know what? Good for him. I too would only really like to talk to Michael Knowles if I was getting paid a lot of money.
Sorry.
I can't
one
get a
question-
dollar amount.
One question per participant.
Yeah, sorry, that's your question.
Leah, could I have a follow-up, though? Could I have a follow-up? Are you getting paid more than me? Because we have to talk about this afterward. This is...
I'll go for Hi, I'd like to say thank you so much to Michael, for coming out. It's been a real pleasure hearing you speak. My question actually goes to both of you, though. So it's been, I know with you, Brad, you argued about with the age of 18, that's kind of the accepted limit
Oh,
of
God.
when someone becomes an adult, and then you
Oh,
said
God.
that's when they should be allowed to, go through gender reassignment surgery. My question is, at what age do you really, age should we define as when one becomes an adult, and should it then be allowed to ban this type of surgery up until that age, or just ban it entirely?
Certainly. We can have an age to buy cigarettes, which they unfortunately raised recently. Now it's 21 to even buy a cigar. But, you could be 18 to do this, 21 to do that, or the other thing. But more importantly, even once one reaches those ages of maturity, the question is, can certain behaviors be banned? And the answer for all of American history, including today, is yes. Even if these are not issues that directly affect somebody else, yes, they can. Destructive, harmful behaviors can be outlawed. That's why we have laws against heroin and lots of other drugs. That's why we have laws against suicide, still in most states in this country. And that's why we have had laws and ordinances against the kind of transgender transition and surgery. Because we can know something about reality. That's the premise of our government. And we can know that even adults sometimes fall into very destructive habits. And because we're all living together in society, if enough people fall into something like the addiction of heroin, then we won't have a true liberty in this country. We'll have merely licentiousness, which is really just a form of slavery. So we can do that. We have done that for most of American history. And that remains very much still a possibility in America unless the libertines get their way.
Yeah, so I think the question is not so much can we or can we not restrict this. It's should we? And I would just say, do you want your own life restricted? Do you want government officials writing rules about what clothing you're allowed to wear? I mean, I think of it, the COVID experiment reminded to me the importance of bodily autonomy and medical freedom. I don't
How are
understand
those
how people can, on
anti-suicide
one
laws
hand,
working
and I'm
out?
assuming
Yeah,
some
who
of Michael's
knows?
positions here,
Don't
but
look too
rail
far into
against
anything he
COVID
says,
vaccine
okay?
mandates, be outraged that the government would tell you you have to take an objection, and I was, but then also think the government should be able to tell you whether or not you can take testosterone pills. Be outraged at the idea of being forced to wear a mask, but think the government should be able to tell you you can't dress a certain way in public. To me, there's a total cognitive dissonance here. I want to live in an America where adults, as long as they're not hurting anybody else, can live their lives how they see fit. Michael apparently wants to live in a sort of majority rules type of you'll live your life the way the majority of people think you should America, which again isn't going to work out for a minoritarian social conservative faction in a country that's becoming more pro-LGBT, becoming less religious, becoming less traditionalist. It's just not going to work out well for you.
We've had a lot of time for us. More questions from the crowd.
Oh, I have such good points
You
to
both,
make.
you both get concluding remarks.
That's true.
Yeah.
Hi, Michael Knowles.
Hello.
So thank you for persisting and coming to speak here despite multiple setbacks. As someone who is conservative and as a devout Catholic who would like to eventually become a commentator for the Daily Wire, similar to your young colleague, Brett Cooper, would you recommend I start posting YouTube videos about my commentary on YouTube, or to gain an audience and traction, or just email Ben Shapiro to ask him if I can have my own show, or how should I begin my career as a commentator?
I'm going to add an addendum to that question, since I'm also Catholic. What prayer rule of life would you suggest for someone who's going to enter into media? I mean it.
The St. Michael prayer about 24 times a day. Really great question. If you're a friend of mine, I would not recommend emailing Ben Shapiro. That's not going to be the right move. What I would recommend for you is that you get a little bit of political experience. If you want to be a political commentator, I would recommend you get a little bit of political experience. You can work on a campaign. That's actually a great way to get political experience.
Michael, you literally failed out of acting school. Like what are your bona fides, okay, Michael Knowles? What are your qualifications in any of this? Hey, Tea with the Goblins, how you doing? Hey, Descriptivist. Sorry, I've been neglecting Twitch chat. Manwich Cannon. That was a pretty authoritarian take, yeah. They all failed out of Hollywood, pretty much.
To know what it's like on the ground and not just what the news says. I would recommend you read everything. The reason I recommend you read everything is because you're young, you're vibrant, and I'm sure you're very well educated, but your views will change as you become educated, and it's a real pity when people become well known at a young age and they say very stupid things and then they come to regret those things later on. So
you're right.
That's the first thing that I would
recommend.
Brett
Cooper is unfortunate.
As for the prayer life, I'm pretty simple about it. I would recommend a nightly rosary. And very simple. I mean, for people who are interested in the faith, I always think, oh, you could read Thomas Aquinas, you could read St. Augustine, you could read all these wonderful people, and I recommend G.K. Chesterton too, all these people. But pray the rosary, and the other thing I would recommend, I'm not even being cheeky here, is I would recommend praying the St. Michael prayer. It's against all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. So.
It's me, I'm the evil spirit.
No, I hate to add another 30 seconds here, but the other night, it was during Lent, I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking about
sorry, I can't allow this. Look at the hands, look at the hands.
All right. I'll suppress my wrath even more, I guess.
All right, can we have another question from the audience? There we go.
Thank you. As I've been listening, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that I'm hearing that there's two different ideologies with each individual. Mr. Palumbo, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like more of a relativist.
No shit, dude. Yeah, they have two different ideologies. Yeah. Good. Real perceptive over here.
Ideology. Mr. Knowles, it sounds more of this basis that there's a truth that is real and that everyone can discover. So that brings me to the question of the thought that maybe the real question should be, what is truth? Otherwise, it seems like the conversation just keeps going back and forth without finding a tangible outcome. Do you think this topic can be decided before answering the question, what is truth?
It's almost like, and I'm just spitballing here, it's almost like one side of this, well, both sides of the debate aren't really talking about any empirical pieces of evidence and are instead trying to rely on, like, making vague platitudinal arguments without actually backing them up with much of substance in any way or degree. Which might be why it just keeps going back and forth interminably forever.
Mr. Palumbo, to you first.
Yeah, I think I'd push back on the idea that I'm like a relativist. I mean, that I don't believe every person, like, I hate the phrase like your truth, or I do think there is a truth. I think we're all imperfect and unable to perceive the perfect truth. And I guess what I'm arguing is not that there is no truth, but just that the idea of having society or the government top-down decide what the truth is and impose it on all of us is antithetical to what I see as human discovery and flourishing, but also to the actual discovery of getting closer to the truth. Because when what is believed to be true is forced on people and different ideas, wrong ideas mostly, are suppressed, that actually leads to less discovery of getting closer to the ultimate truth. That's what we see. That's why things that were considered complete conspiracy theories a year or two ago are now like, oh yeah, that probably happened.
Oh, God damn it.
And so that's why I would say it's not that I don't believe there is a truth, it's that I believe that decentralizing truth-seeking is the best approach to get us as imperfect beings closer to it.
And that is what we aim to do in this debate. We're nearing the end of our time. I want to give you time for your last roundup since I've cut you off and you've saved those all up for a rapid fire.
May I answer this question?
Go
though,
for
that
it.
was raised?
Sorry,
So,
I didn't mean to go
I wonder, Brad, if you see the irony in insisting upon your view of society, which is the view that says we can't have standards and we can't use the government and society to impose rules. Because my preferred society is the society in America that we've had pretty much for our nation's history, and it's the view that says that we can set standards and women can have bathrooms and we can just have norms and we can behave in a normal way. And what you're saying is, Michael, that's authoritarian, and so I, the great liberator, I am going to insist that none of you have those standards and those norms
No, you can
anymore.
have those standards in your community, in your church, in your school, in your business. What you can't do is tell the rest of the world how to live.
You just said I can have it in my community.
Yes.
Okay, so we can have it in my community, but not in
As
someone
your-
else's community.
As in your
What does that
community
mean?
in terms of a private community setting.
There's no private community.
What
The
is your
community's public.
What is your church? Your church is a community.
But my community is Nashville, Tennessee.
All right,
My
well,
state
that's
is
your
Tennessee.
city,
My country
and I
is
don't
America.
think your city can declare one correct view of the truth for all its residents. I mean,
But
there's
it
plenty
does.
of
It has
countries
laws.
you could live in that do those kinds of things. But
But all states are like that because all states have laws and they declare certain things true and others false, and some licit and some illicit. That's what statecraft is.
But that's typically done where the intersection of rights occurs, where one person's right to swing their fist ends where another person's face begins. Not when it comes to questions of individual beliefs being policed by
Like
the
who
state.
gets to go into a bathroom?
Well, who owns
No,
the bathroom?
damn it, I jumped
They can
into
make
the death.
rule. You don't own the bathroom.
What about
I
the
don't own
government? What about the
bathroom.
military bathrooms and the school bathrooms?
The military, it can have its policies about.
That's the government. So what's the
Well,
government going to
obviously
say?
the government has to have its own policies, but that's quite different than telling everybody.
I think I'll pause this
Libertarianism
here for a moment, 'cause
is,
I think you've exposed
incoherent.
the fundamental rift here. I'm going to give my last question, then we'll have your closing thoughts so people can get home. It's a very short question.
See, now
Okay.
you know how it feels,
Just
Leah.
do
You
it.
see that?
Just do it.
Huh?
I'm not in a rush.
Well, I would just like to know, for your own later things which you can weave into your closing thoughts if you choose, there are a lot of people out here tonight who think, frankly, both of you are pretty seriously wrong on this issue. And even if you're right here, many of us have something where we later realize we've been wrong and we've harmed people as a result of being wrong. And I'm curious what you think is most helpful to you in realizing where you're
Oh, God.
wrong on other issues. But you may give your closing thoughts, and that is merely a suggestion, not gavel enforced. But I think this is an issue like abortion where people think, in good faith on both sides, the stakes are very high, and it's hard to be patient when you think lives are at risk. All right, you get to go first.
I'll answer your question as I walk to the lectern. Personal humility is helpful, and deference to the tradition is probably wise. But now I have to walk back to get my closing remarks, Leah. You can't fool me by having me only answer your question. All right. Wonderful night. Thank you so much to everybody. It's especially a wonderful night because on the precise topic of the debate, my opponent, Brad, seemed to concede a fair bit of it before we began, that the government should in some ways regulate transgenderism. This is great. My first opponent dropped out, so this is a great debate. This is my favorite one I've ever been part of. The law, as we have shown, must regulate transgenderism because transgenderism contradicts the understanding of man and woman long established in our law. Even the most tolerant society cannot simultaneously uphold mutually contradictory principles. Either women get their own bathrooms or they don't. Private enterprise can't solve the problem because the
God
practical
damn it.
implications
God
of
fucking damn it.
transgenderism
God
extend
damn
far
it.
beyond
God
private
damn it.
business. The law cannot evade
Dark
the
Souls
question.
is fun.
QED. Before we go, though, I would like to look a little bit further and ask how the law should regulate transgenderism. We have two options: embrace transgender anthropology, which is to deny the natural distinction between men and women, or to restore the understanding of sex that accords with reason and reality and which civilization has embraced for all of history. Not a tough choice
That's
to me.
not true.
The law
though.
most basically is an ordinance of reason for the common good promulgated by the one who has care of the community. When law becomes unreasonable and untethered from reality, society flounders, as we see increasingly today. We will live according to some standard or another. The only question is whether we'll live in accordance with truth or falsehood. We will summon the confidence to assert the truth, which we can know through our reason and conscience, without which faculties self-government would be impossible, or we will shrug our shoulders like the cynic Pontius Pilate and ask that question we just heard: what is truth? We have seen the rotten fruit of cynical politics. As a citizen in a self-governing republic, I say we ought to live according to the truth, which sets us free and which offers the only path to a flourishing society for everyone. Thank you very much.
The debate we're having here tonight really fundamentally comes down to what kind of a society we want America to be. Do we want to be a pluralistic and classically liberal society where people of different beliefs and values can live side by side? Or do we want to fight in an ever intensifying struggle, a tug of war over the state, to be used to crush minority viewpoints and force conformity, force people to live how others see fit? I know which one I would like, and I would humbly suggest that the viewpoint of those conservatives, I would humbly suggest that the viewpoint of those conservatives who wish to regulate transgenderism out of existence is incompatible with that fundamental view of America as a place where each person can chart their own way in life as long as they're not hurting anybody else. I also would just reiterate that it's remarkably short-sighted. 30% of America identifies as socially conservative. If you guys really don't want to leave space for different lifestyles, for unpopular viewpoints, that is not going to go well in a democratic society. So if this newfound flavor of authoritarian-style conservatism gets its wishes, it won't just be betraying some of the principles that make America great. It will be setting the stage for its own destruction, and frankly, that destruction will be deserved. Thank you.
Ayo. Got him. You know, it's funny that Michael Knowles will make arguments about like how like trans people are destroying America, but then this guy comes along, he's like, yeah, America's gonna be destroyed if it doesn't embrace trans people, and like Michael Knowles is just like, yeah, ho ho ho, hee hee, look at how much fun we have. A tee hee 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 hee. I finally got through this fucking room. And we finally got through my transphobia gauntlet. As a reward, I offer you feet.
Conventional shoe design has some serious problems, and what I'm about to show you will probably make you think you want to throw your shoes in the bin. But it's not that simple. The barefoot community has some secrets that no one seems to want to talk about. This video is going to be a balanced and evidence-based look at this debate, and it'll hopefully help you decide if barefoot shoes are right for you. So if you're new to barefoot shoes, I'll just explain briefly what they are. So they're shoes that have an ultra-thin, ultra-flexible sole that's an even thickness at the front as it is at the heel. And they also have a toe box that's kind of more foot-shaped. It's squarer and wider right at the front of the toe. Basically,
I don't know how I
it's
feel
as
about
close to
this
a
one,
shoe that
boys.
has no kind of features to it. There's no latest shock-absorbing technology they can boast about. And that's why they're often called minimalist shoes. So this discussion has two sides. And on the one hand, you've got the barefoot community who basically think barefoot shoes are the solution to all kinds of problems. They fix your posture, they strengthen your feet, and they prevent injury to your hips and your knees. And then on the other hand, you've got people that think switching to barefoot shoes is basically a very fast way of injuring your feet, and that we should be using cushioned padded soles on our shoes now because we're walking on hard surfaces, which is not what we've done over our kind of ancestral history. So for some reason, fashion has dictated that these conventional shoes have this crazy pointed toe at the front. So if you think about your foot, your toes are obviously not pointed, so why are we wedging our feet into these shoes? I think it's interesting if you look at the kind of history of these style shoes. You had the ruling elites who kind of adopted this fashion of really elongated, pointed shoes as a way of kind of saying F you to the working classes who couldn't wear those kinds of shoes because they had to do manual labor. So obviously when we're exploring what's really good for our feet in terms of healthy movement, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better example that a pointed shoe
Why
is
did I
exactly
do
the opposite
that?
of what we want here. Pointed shoes are actually
God, I
listed
thought
as
you were
one of the
joking.
causes of
Nope.
bunions. So these kinds of shoes are literally damaging our feet. People's feet kind of adapt to this pointed shape as a result of wearing these shoes their whole lives. Now what's really interesting though is that your feet will grow back to their natural shape when you switch to barefoot shoes. So the foot strike is one of the first things that comes up when we're discussing barefoot shoes. So conventional shoes with their cushioned sole encourage you to heel strike hard with each footstep because you don't feel the pain that's normally associated with that kind of a hard heel strike. And that additional shock, even though it is cushioned by the sole of the shoe, is what's associated with knee and hip injuries in runners. So in barefoot shoes or without any shoes at all, you're kind of forced to use a forefoot strike or a midfoot strike. Otherwise, your heel just really hurts from that shock. This is of course only true on hard paved surfaces. It is perfectly possible to heel strike on a soft ground, but hold that thought. So when you walk with barefoot shoes or with no shoes at all, it's very clear that your foot wants to kind of bend and push off at the back of the foot stroke, and it takes your weight for longer at the back of your stride.
I don't know how
allowing you
much
to
of
come
this is
down more
bullshit.
gently with your front foot. So if you think about walking about with no shoes on, it's obviously really important that you don't stand on something sharp. So you can see how landing more gently on your front foot is going to be an advantage there. And you can imagine that through evolution, if that was a trait of ours, it would be favored by the evolutionary process. Interestingly, studies have also shown that wearing barefoot shoes does make your feet stronger than wearing normal conventional shoes. So all that cushioning and padding is basically just making us lazy and our feet are getting weaker. So the third problem is this toe spring, which is where the sole of the shoe is curved up. Just
Like, this guy, look, this guy could be spewing just as much shit as Michael Knowles is about, like, feet. But I have no knowledge about feet. I have no idea to tell whether or not he's telling the truth.
under your toe. And if
The
you think about
solution is to
impact of
only
that,
wear
what it
slippers,
means
true.
is as your back foot is rolling forwards, your toes are not able to press down on the floor. So that pivot point is further back than it would be had you been able to use your toes at the back of that foot stroke. So this is kind of encouraging that hard heel strike because it's kind of kicking you forwards each time. And then if you think about the impact of the wedged heel combined with that, what's actually happening is your weight is that much further forward because of the wedge and because you can't press down with your toes. So all of this kind of leads to this reinforcement of the idea of the hard heel strike. And of course, if you're heel striking hard, that kind of justifies having a thicker cushioned sole. But of course,
Oh
it's the
god,
thicker
of
cushioned
course,
sole that made
Neuron,
the
the
heel strike hard in
solution.
the first
We
place.
need to run around naked outside.
The problem is we've got a bit of an elephant in the room because heel striking is actually more efficient for walking than forefoot striking. And this is what nobody in the barefoot community wants to talk about. So interestingly, by the time you're running, there's no efficiency gain to heel striking. So this combined with the evidence that forefoot striking while running reduces the rate of injury is all starting to sound pretty compelling that we should be using a forefoot strike when we're running. But there doesn't seem to be much evidence that suggests we shouldn't heel strike when walking. So I think the question for me is how hard we should be heel striking and on what surfaces. So we obviously know that we spent most of our evolutionary history not wearing shoes. So it stands to reason that if we look at people who still habitually don't wear shoes, we can kind of derive some sense of what our bodies want to do in that situation. But here's the thing, studies actually show that habitually unshod people do still heel strike while walking. And some of those groups, but not all of them, do still heel strike at endurance running speeds. But that's probably very likely because they're running on softer ground. Among these barefoot populations, there seems to be some difference in the speed at which a forefoot strike is selected. And it looks like that comes down to a combination of things, including the firmness of the ground and things like the total volume of running done per week. So the soft ground combined with the efficiency is obviously why we've maintained this heel pad that our great ape ancestors have evolved. So we know that habitually unshod populations all
Good
switch
job,
to a 4-foot
great ape
strike
ancestors.
to deal with the increased collision force. So that's a combination of the firmness of the ground and the speed. So by the time we're talking about a full sprint, there's nobody who's left heel striking because the impact force is just too great, and everybody has switched to the 4-foot strike. So it looks like what's happening is habitually barefoot populations are all switching to a 4-foot strike based on a combination of volume, speed, and the firmness of the ground. But here's the thing, they're all doing that without wearing shoes at any of those speeds. They just simply react and change the 4-foot strike. They don't wear shoes for one condition and not another. They're just barefoot the whole time. So I think this is what it all really boils down to. If we know we should be heel striking on soft ground, how do we know if we should be heel striking on hard pavement that we're all walking on now? So I think this is just one of those things that if you just take your shoes off and walk on a hard pavement, it very quickly becomes clear that you can't heel strike on hard pavement in bare feet. And what you'll notice when you're doing that is that you naturally modify your foot stroke to avoid those hard heel strikes. So using our barefoot intuition, we can see exactly how we should be walking in barefoot. So what this basically means is we're faced with this conscious decision. We're faced with, in evolutionary terms, a very, very rapid environmental difference. We're now walking on ultra hard surfaces that we haven't really ever had to do before. So do we just add more padding to our shoes to deal with this? Or do we do what our ancestors have done and just let our bodies modify the way we walk according to what we're walking on? So here's the thing, a lot of barefoot enthusiasts really advocate a proper 4-foot strike while walking. Now I've worn barefoot shoes for 6 years and I don't think I've actually modified to a full 4-foot strike while walking. My heel does still play a role in my natural foot strike. It's just a very gentle one. It's almost, I guess, maybe a mid-foot strike where it's kind of like the whole of my foot is just coming down on the ground at the same time and I'm immediately pushing down through my calf muscle and down through the ball of my foot to take that weight in that strike. So my heel really isn't getting any of that major impact. But on the same note, I'm definitely not just prancing around on the front of my feet, which I think is actually pretty awkward.
Okay, I gotta be honest with you. This isn't selling me on these shoes, on this style of shoe at all.
And you know, you do look a bit weird when you're walking like that. So my personal opinion is that barefoot shoes are actually really beneficial. They are kind of forcing us to think about the way we walk and drawing our attention to how we're walking. I like the way that basically walking like this increases strength. It increases our foot strength and it increases the strength in our calves because your calf muscles take on the role of absorbing that shock instead of the shock just going through to your knees and your hips and into the sole of your shoe. And I think barefoot shoes absolutely do promote good foot health. I mean, how can they not when we're comparing to a pointed shoe that we know causes bunions and deforms your feet? I'm actually pretty sure that my toes have spread out since using barefoot shoes, and really annoyingly I don't have a before picture from 6 years ago, but my wife and I definitely think that my toes are now much wider and more spaced out and more naturally foot shaped than they used to be. So walking...
But why is that better? I guess that's my question. Like, why is that better? You could just wear normal shoes. I don't know.
Barefoot or in barefoot style shoes forces you to engage with your feet, and it builds strength and mobility, and it encourages your feet to be their natural shape. What's really striking when you first switch to barefoot shoes is just how much your calf muscle is.
Yeah, but like when you say it builds strength and mobility, what does that mean tangibly, right? Like what about like does that mean you can walk like 3 more miles? Like what does it mean, right?
Doing the work. It's just intuitive. As soon as you do it, you immediately take the weight off your heel and the calf muscle takes over. And the first couple of days, your calf muscle will absolutely be burning, so you know what's going on. And it's an interesting reminder that all of the energy that your calf muscle is dealing with there was actually energy that was just being transmitted through your joints and by that cushioned sole in the normal shoes. So yeah, it does feel a little bit like it's more effort to walk in a barefoot shoe, but training of any kind is more effort. You have to put some effort in to get stronger. Things like strength training and weightlifting all involve more effort than not doing those things, but they result in more strength. I guess it's a little bit like a martial art. You're improving your form and your strength a little bit every day through every step that you take. It's like a discipline that you need to choose to persist with because it is that bit more effort, but the reward is there. It's quite interesting in terms of sprinting after 6 years wearing barefoot shoes. I can break into a sprint in my normal shoes anywhere, anytime. I don't have any issues or injuries. I can just go flat out and it feels great. It feels like my feet are doing this incredible thing. All of this goes way deeper than I've looked at here as well. There are things like anterior tilt and glute activation and all kinds of other posture-related things that come into play here. And the Grown and Healthy YouTube channel is a great place to go further and learn more about this kind of stuff. There are a couple of other companies that do barefoot shoes, but I really like the way Vivo Barefoot, this is not a sponsored video by the way, I just happen to have used these over the years. I really like the way that, because when you fit these, you're supposed to have a good chunk of space above your toe, in front of your toe. Normally, if you were to size a shoe like that, your foot would slide forward, because generally most shoes are not designed to stop your foot sliding forward. They're just designed to just be kind of padded, and you shove your foot in, and people tend to have them quite sloppily tied up around the ankle because it's not needed as part of the way it works. With a barefoot shoe, there's so much space at the front, you need to hold your foot at the back of the shoe. And all the Vivo Barefoot shoes that I've had have had this really well-designed...
But why is there so much space at the front?
...part at the ankle. They sort of prioritize this part of the shoe to make sure that when you tie it up, you're actually kind of containing your ankle at this part of the shoe, so it doesn't slide forward. And that means this wide, big toe box with all the space around your toes, it has got that space available for your toes always to push forward and spread out into. I don't think people really kind of appreciate that important part of a barefoot shoe design. And Vivo Barefoot seem to really understand that, even with their sort of less boot-like lower shoe designs. They've always got this prominent kind of part that comes up onto the top of your foot to help it stop it sliding forward. There is a refer a friend scheme that I've got in my account, so I'll pop that link in there. You can get 20% off if you use that link. There has been a study of runners who switched to barefoot shoes and actually ended up injuring themselves. I think if you were to spend your whole life wearing normal shoes and then switch to barefoot shoes and run in them, I think because you're not used to them, and obviously you're running and you're going straight into that, then you know there definitely is a good chance that you're going to injure yourself. But I think if you're just talking about walking and you work your way into it slowly and you're intentional about it and you're being gentle with your feet while you're transitioning into this kind of way of walking, I think you'll be fine. I did that 6 years ago. I haven't looked back. I never got any injuries. I took it fairly slowly. I was very conscious that my calf muscles were doing a lot of the work, and I was very conscious not to heel strike hard because I could feel it very obviously. So I think if you listen to your feet and you don't push it, if it does hurt, then back off. And there are tons of really good videos about how to kind of minimize the chance of injury when you do switch to these kinds of shoes, and I'll link to those in the description as well. If you've enjoyed this kind of look at...
I guess I just don't get it. I don't get it. Sorry. Also, chat, we've been streaming. I have streamed for, let's take a look, it's in a book, Reading Rainbow. I can't do anything. Okay, I have streamed for 13 hours today. If you have enjoyed my content, if you have found it fun, refreshing, informative, whatever, consider hitting the follow button, consider hitting the like button, consider subscribing on YouTube, consider doing all of those things, and then also consider, hey, maybe throwing some subs or donos my way, because that's how I'm able to live and make more content for you. Okay? Let's go! You're a real one? Hey, we needed to finish up the charity stream, and you know, we spent like 6 hours doing that. I figured I would come back and do another 7 or 8 hours with you guys to do a real politics show, okay? We did it. It's good. And I hope that you guys appreciate it, you know? Me neither? Okay. I'm glad I'm not the only one who doesn't get the flat shoes. Oh, streamer, my streamer. Folks, thank you for supporting me throughout the streams, and thank you for donating to the Trans Empowerment Project that we, I'm really impressed that we made it over 2K. I'm not sure when we will do the Karl Marx AI bot, but it should be pretty fun. I am going to raid into... Man, I need to refresh this tab because Hasanabi is definitely not online right now. We are going to raid into Tofu Ghost. Alright? And I love you all. And I will see you on the morrow. I will see you tomorrow for more content. Yay! Get good sleep. Have sweet dreams. Drink a lot of water. And I'll see you again soon. Bye.